Bolivia just held its presidential election, and socialist presidential candidate Luis Arce has won that election, which is fantastic news, especially when you consider that there was a military-backed coup that took place last year. It was very much influenced by the Organization of American States, which is mostly funded by the United States, in an effort to oust Evo Morales. He fled the country and is now in Argentina. However, his economic minister, Luis Arce, decided to run in this race, and it's clear that he won. His opponents have conceded that he has won. And let me give you the details on this and fill you in on what this all means. So the independent counts showed that Arce had a little over 50% of the vote and roughly a 20-point advantage over centrist former president Carlos Mesa, who acknowledged defeat. Now, the formal official count had Mesa with only 41 to 39% lead over Arce, with 24% of the vote tallied on Monday. But those votes appeared to be largely from urban areas rather than the rural heartlands that have been the base of Evo Morales' support. Officials said final results could take days. Now, the interim president, funny enough, Jeanine Áñez, asked Arce to govern with Bolivia and democracy in mind. Okay, so let's stop right there. So this right-wing interim president was not democratically elected by the people of Bolivia. In fact, after the United States orchestrated a coup in Bolivia and ousted a very popular president and forced him to flee the country and go to Argentina, what did this right-wing intern government do? Again, not democratically elected. They went on to do unthinkable things to the indigenous community in Bolivia. They were incredibly cruel. The videos that circulated throughout the internet during the time immediately after the coup happened were absolutely disgusting, beyond disturbing. This woman and her interim government does not represent democracy, does not care about democracy. Our country that's now being led by a man who has made very clear that he has no interest in democracy. Donald Trump is doing anything and everything he can to rig this election in his favor by trying to dismantle the post office. He's tried to spread disinformation about our elections. It was his government, with the help of senators like Marco Rubio, that spread this ridiculous narrative about how Evo Morales was rigging the election in his favor. Okay, and as soon as he was ousted, the situation on the ground in Bolivia became much worse, and it's exactly what you would expect from a military or US-backed coup that uses the military in Bolivia to oust a popular leftist president, who, by the way, pulled about 20% of the country out of poverty because he believed in using Bolivia's natural resources to benefit the people of Bolivia as opposed to multinational corporations. So anyway, this is my long-winded way of saying it appears that democracy has actually won in Bolivia. And while I feel celebratory and many people on the left feel celebratory today, I do want to also note that, in Bolivia, the people are very cautious, knowing that there is some possibility that the United States might not react well to this news. But for the moment being, Luis Arce, who was Evo Morales's former economic minister, has been elected as the new president of Bolivia.
Okay, so first of all, there's this mythology that the right wing puts out and the United States government puts out, but is very much backed by the media in this country, that leftists are not popular in Latin America, South America, and the rest of the world. They only seize power through authoritarian means. Whenever there's a leftist government, they immediately go, well, that sounds authoritarian to us, I don't know, right? Meanwhile, as Anna pointed out, they're the ones who took over in a coup. I'm pretty sure that's far more authoritarian. And if Morales didn't win the election, why do we assume the right wing should hold office? The whole point was they said, we don't know who won the election. Okay, so why does the right wing get to do a coup? And when we tested the theory on whether they were popular through a thing we call an election, it turns out, no, the right wing is deeply unpopular in Bolivia. The left wing is very popular. It looks like, and that's why we had immediate concessions, that the leftists, in this case, won by over 20 points, an epic landslide. So is that going to stop the American media and the right wing in this country from intimating that leftists are not popular? No, they're gonna keep putting out the same propaganda because that's what they use to justify coups. And that's why in this case, calling it propaganda is not hyperbole or an analogy or a metaphor. It's very, very literal. They're doing propaganda. So, and what is the point? Why is the entire United States government, Democrats and Republicans? Democrats are right-wingers a lot of times in these cases. Not all Democrats, Bernie Sanders wouldn't do it. That's why the rest of the corporate Democratic Party despise them. But Obama, Bill Clinton, etc. Why do they normally go along with this? Because the business interest in America would rather have the minerals and the natural resources for themselves. And why are the leftists popular? Because they say, hey, you know what? If it's Bolivian minerals or it's Venezuelan oil, well, the Bolivian people and the Venezuelan people should benefit the most. It doesn't mean you can't use an outside company. It doesn't mean that they can't make a profit. But it is the people's money. By the way, you know who agreed to that just as much as Evo Morales and Hugo Chavez? A politician we had in this country. Her name was Sarah Palin. She actually did something even more bold in Alaska, where she raised the prices on the oil companies extracting oil from Alaska. And with that money, she sent $2,000 checks to almost every citizen in Alaska. And that's why she had an 80% popularity rating. Because if you actually give people what is actually theirs, they like it. If you give it to a foreign government or foreign corporations, they don't like it. Wow, so surprising.
Right. And Cenk, one of the natural resources in Bolivia that multinational corporations have their sights set on is lithium, right? Especially when it comes to powering non-gas fueled cars. And so it's not just about oil. It's not just about the natural resources that we hear about over and over again when we hear about the US-backed coups of leftist leaders. It's also about lithium, and it's just hilarious to me that like the New York Times just regurgitated the narrative coming from the Organization of American States that Evo Morales did something awful and dictatorial. Now, in reality, what Evo Morales did is he ran for another term. There are term limits in Bolivia, but much like here in the United States, if you are, let's say, someone like George W. Bush, and there's some sort of issue with the election, you can turn to the Supreme Court and hope that the Supreme Court has your back, right? Something similar happened in Bolivia where he essentially worked through the courts, wanted to run for another term. He ran for another term, and the vote totals made it abundantly clear that he won that election. He won that election. But it didn't matter because all OAS needed to do, Organization of American States, was just claim that there was some election rigging, some weird inconsistencies. They didn't provide any evidence of that whatsoever, but it didn't matter. The New York Times just printed it. And shockingly enough, it took the Washington Post to investigate that story and find that there was absolutely no evidence of election rigging, and that what actually happened on the ground in Bolivia was a coup. And it harmed so many indigenous people in that country. It led to an incredibly undemocratic outcome where you have this right-wing, unelected person in charge. And for her to turn around and accuse someone who was democratically elected of possibly governing the country in an undemocratic way is hilarious. And I do want to note, things were looking a little dire because they had postponed this election several times as a result of the pandemic. And so people were starting to worry that an actual democratic election wasn't going to be held, but luckily it was held. And now, again, Luis Arce has won that election. One other note: Jeanine Áñez's government, that's the interim government, tried to overturn many of Evo Morales' policies and wrench the country away from its leftist alliances. Newly installed electoral authorities barred Morales from running in Sunday's election, even for a seat in Congress, and he faces prosecution on what are seen as trumped up up, meaning they're false, charges of terrorism if he returns home.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
absurd. Yeah, so I know another guy who violated term limits, Michael Bloomberg. Has anyone removed him from the country? There's term limits in New York, and he ran for mayor again. And no one cared. Why? Because he's rich and he helps Wall Street and other corporations. You know why some of those tin pot dictators in the past were called banana republics, that they ran banana republics in Central America? It's because we invaded them over literal bananas. Like they were charging, the corporations wanted to pay less for bananas and give the people of those countries less money. That was a natural resource. And we invaded them and did coups against them because of that. It's our fault. And look, I want international independent observers in Bolivia and America, in every one of these countries, so that none of this happens. And if we have it that way and fair elections, the left will win easily. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.